Our project for this module is a mermaid tail keychain, and so this is the mold that we're going to be using. It is a glossy silicone mermaid tail mold. You can see that it's shiny on the inside, which is going to be great for holding on to the mica powders that we're going to use with this project. So this is my mica powder palette. It's kind of banged up a little bit, but you can see inside. Each compartment has its own color, and I actually have a few of these because I use a lot of mica in my work. When we're starting out with mica, we want to make sure that the mold is clean. As you can see, the tail is really clean and shiny. There's no lint in there, and you're going to need a paintbrush with a somewhat firm bristles on it. And so not too fluffy, not too soft. So when you're using mica powders, you want to be sure that you know which colors you're going to be using, what look you're going for. For this mermaid tail, I want to use a rainbow pattern. So I like to start with the lightest color first, because mica can transfer when you're switching from color to color. So you want to make sure that you're starting with your lightest color first. And so for me, it's not exactly the lightest color, but it's on the lighter end of the colors I'm going to be using. I'm going to be starting with like a pinkish color at the end of the tail. So I just pick some up on my brush. You can see it there. It's very easy to pick it up, and you just, a little bit, and then you just start brushing it into the mold. And so take your time with this. As you can see on the mermaid tail in the fin area, there's some grooves and there's some cracks and crevices. You want to make sure that you are really pushing the powder into those cracks and crevices, because when you take your finished piece out, if you skipped any part of the mold, it's going to show. Like the background color is going to come through. So just be overly cautious. Go over it a couple of times. Even if you thought that you swept it in there really good, sweep it in again. Now I'm coming in with a copper color, and I'm going to just repeat that technique all the way through the tail. So making sure that it meets the previous color where it stopped. You can even overlap a little bit, and really just sweeping it into the sides of the mold, into the lines, and making sure that you are really pushing it in there. Every time I take the tail out of the frame of the camera, it's because I'm blowing off the excess. What you don't want to do is leave all the excess powder, like small piles of powder. You'll see once you start working with mica, you can get these like small piles or pockets of powder building up if you don't blow it away, and then that's going to look kind of chunky when you remove it from the mold. So make sure that once you've really brushed it into all the areas that you want to, that you're then blowing away the excess out of the mold. And so now I'm coming in with a teal color, and I love this color. It's so beautiful. But once again, blending it with the previous color. So you want to make sure that you're up against the line where the previous color ended, and then kind of just blending it in a little bit. And you don't have to be really rough. You just have to rub it in pretty well. Now that we're making it into the scale area, this is where it gets a little tricky. So staying with the same technique of taking your brush onto the into the color and sweeping it in, you want to make sure that you are getting deep into the scales. With the scales and any mold that you have that has like cracks and crevices that are really deep like this, you want to make sure, or even sharp lines like these scales are, you really want to make sure that you're going back and forth from every direction. That's why I'm flipping it upside down and right side up because I really want to make sure that I've gotten into every crevice of the scale area. You can see right here that I'm coming back in with the aqua because I realized there was an area that wasn't really covered well enough. So I just came back in and added a little bit more aqua to that area and really covered it. You really got to make sure that you are using a keen eye to make sure that all areas of the mold are covered with the mica. So after that light blue, I went into a more royal blue because we're doing that gradient or rainbow effect, and it's the same thing with these scales. Like, although I love how the mermaid tail looks when it's all complete, it is a labor of love, so just make sure that you're really paying close attention to getting the mica into those scales really, really well, and then also blowing it out. With the scales, they can collect powder very easily, so make sure that you're taking your time looking for any areas where it's kind of collected and blowing it out. The last color I'm going to use is this like royal purple color, and it's just absolutely beautiful as well. Same technique, except for the fact that I'm going to actually be sweeping it upwards into the top of the mold here. That's the end of the tail, like on an anatomical mermaid. That's where her tail would meet her body, her stomach area. So right there, I'm gonna flip it and then really make sure I get a lot of purple there and cover that space, because you'll be able to see that area on the keychain as well. It's important to get all the sides of the mold. Anywhere where resin is going to touch needs to have mica powder on it, or else it's going to look like an empty space, and you don't want that. So just really blending, brushing. Think of it like blending eyeshadow. You want to make sure that there's not any like really rigid lines. You want to blend very well. And so this is what it looks like before I pour the resin. I've mixed up 2 tablespoons of resin here, and it's clear as you can see, and I'm actually going to color it with white paint. I'm going to make it white because it really makes that rainbow effect pop. So I shake up my acrylic paint and I add a couple of drops, and I really like to start with the smallest amount possible. So maybe 1 or 2 drops to start with, mix it up and see how opaque it is, if it's the color that I want it to be. I actually had to add a few more drops because it was just a little too clear, a little too translucent, and I wanted it to be really opaque. So I just keep adding a little bit at a time until I bring it up to the color that I really want it to be. The cool thing is, once you start adding paint into your resin, you can mix as fast as you want to. Those air pockets or air bubbles aren't as present. It's something about the paint, I don't know what it is, but you don't get those bubbles like you would get when you're just mixing it clear, so you can mix as fast as you want to. And so this is the 3rd time I add a couple of drops and mix it up really quickly, and it's finally the color that I want it to be. So now that it's the color I want, I'm going to start pouring it into the mold, and I want to make sure that before I pour it, I'm scraping those edges, making sure that there's no like big globs of paint at the bottom. But I'm going to actually start at the lowest point of the mold, which is up by the purple side. You want to do that so you don't create huge air pockets, and just pour slowly. And you can see that since the tail is on an incline, the way that the tail is made, it inclines up towards the very fin area. So you're going to have to come down and pour the fin after you've filled the scale area. Just keep it slow and see where it needs to get filled in a little bit more. And you can drop a little bit at a time in areas that you feel are empty. Then I like to tap it against the table to make sure that it really fills in any little corners or crevices that maybe the resin didn't hit. And then I'm going to come through with my heat gun and pop any surface air bubbles that might be there. And then it just cures after that.